Hi, welcome to another TA Talks. We're talking about transformation in TA with Global VP of Talent Acquisition in IBM, Kevin Blair. Kevin, it's your second TA Talk with us, first time with IBM.
It is.
And what we're going to talk about today is, I know your TA team has undergone an enormous amount of transformation, a very large team, we should talk about that in a second, a lot of complexity. But one of the things that most recently that has struck me and I think you're most passionate about is understanding the metrics by which we define TA success and how that relates to the business. I want to talk to you about how that's transforming in IBM and your vision of how that perhaps should be perceived by the wider TA community. But maybe if I can start, maybe tell us a little bit about IBM. For a lot of us, we might think of IBM as the computer company, the PC company. You've talked a lot about how growing up it was the computer company. Maybe not everyone knows what IBM is today. If you could maybe give us a bit of background to that, why you joined IBM, what the talent acquisition team looks like, and maybe just give us a summary of some of the challenges that you've been going through in the last year and a half with the business and where it looks before we talk about how you got to the point where you're looking at why the metrics need to change. So actually with 17 different things there, right? Let's go back to the, like start with you, maybe back to the start of the journey,
very
right?
Precise. Yeah.
Why IBM, when you joined, and maybe from there an understanding of who they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's funny you say because you're right. Like when you think of IBM, certainly when I was growing up, it was synonymous with just computing, like and technology, and even I think my parents. I remember when I said to them I was joining IBM. I mean, they acknowledge and recognize it's one of the few technology companies that they would know and that they would identify with. So from that perspective, yeah, I mean, clearly. It was a great initial approach to think about, as an organization, what they've done historically and the things they've achieved. But then when you think about the talent transformation, the talent acquisition journey they need to go on, I think they really were very thoughtful about what they wanted from a talent acquisition function. So it wasn't just a case of, okay, well, we want to just, build something that's a machine and that's, something that's just going to deliver based around a demand or a set of requisitions or, something that's really just going to be competitive based on speed, but actually be really thoughtful about all elements of the process. And so, when the decision was made to go outside and hire the team that we've got today and the executive team, it was really very much based around the idea of looking at all elements of the process and not just, thinking about the IBM history where, IBM has been very successful from an applicant perspective for a long, long time in terms of, it's traditionally core markets and as opposed to the markets where we now have moved into very aggressively because they're new markets and new opportunities for us, as they are for everybody else. So it's, nobody's really grandfathered in. So obviously we'll continue, from a brand perspective and from a point of view, people continually, several millions of people continue to apply as applicants, and it's very valuable to us as an organization. But also recognizing that, how do we assess those candidates? How do we continue to proactively bring people in, and how do we leverage the great work that we're doing as an organization, not as a TA function, not just saying, hey, we're a great company, like come and talk to us, but actually the work that we actually do and the downstream work that we actually create. So from that perspective, it was a huge challenge because what we wanted to do is like forensically examine all parts of our process and not just say, okay, these processes could be better, but actually challenge the idea of, are these traditional hierarchies of recruitment even the right things to be looking at? Is this the things we should be looking at? Should we be just, taking a job description and matching a CV or a profile or insights against somebody against that? I mean, that's an important part of it, but as we all know, the skills gap is getting bigger. And so therefore we need to think, okay, well, what's beyond that? Like what, skills are like a new currency. And so therefore, like, how do we think about things that actually are predictors of success in our environment? So not just saying, okay, well, it's easy to say, okay, well, we like Java people and we want to hire Java people. So, this person has Java, but actually, will that person go on to be successful in our environment? And how do we predict that? Will that person, potentially have more long range potential in our organization? And also, if they don't have the full complete skill set, how do we, through inference, get insights around, okay, well, maybe they're not quite there now, but actually, the velocity in either their careers or the way they built up their skills profile would get us there. And so first of all, think about that. So that's just one element. So that's just around selection. You know, the idea that we would then start to tap into some of the human skills, so going beyond just the idea of skills and technical skills, looking at things like learning agility and cognitive ability. You know, so the ability to be in a continual learning mindset and grow, and the appetite to grow the skills is critically important.
So doing it differently with 4 people in your TA team is one thing where you go, team, let's get together to change the world of recruiting. You've got over 1,000 people in your recruitment organization directly recruiting, right? Yeah. So the scale is probably bigger than most. There's probably a handful of teams that have a size, a scale of that magnitude. Talk to me about your transformation and the philosophy around moving from where TA is today, you call it traditional maybe recruiting, towards what I believe your team has kind of coined this augmented recruiter approach, all the way to cognitive. And then what that looks like, those 3 different frameworks, maybe, what does the transformation look like? How is the role changing between those 3 roles? And where is IBM today in that journey between those 3?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because, you know, as we've gone on this journey, you're right. We have a big organization relative to perhaps other talent acquisition organizations, but we're a big organization. We have a big demand, right? So there's a lot of work. So you can't not satisfy that demand and focus purely on innovation. Equally, you can't focus purely on innovation and trying to reinvent the processes and think differently if you're just purely focused on delivery. So we've been striking that fine balance, and I've been lucky in one respect that, you know, the people that we brought in have been able to think differently, and the people that were in the organization already have been able to really step up and challenge and really, with the knowledge and the deep-seated knowledge of IBM, do something a little bit different and really take the confidence of the business knowledge across to both sides. So it's working really well. But you're right. I mean, right now, I guess we have 3 different types of recruiter in our organization, or talent acquisition partner, as we call them. And they leverage different methodologies of getting the job done, if you like. So the first one is, the very traditional, as we would know it, requisition-based recruiter that works through a traditional process and drives, towards the outcome of hiring based on a requisition that we would possibly fill through a channel like an applicant channel, through our careers page, through a referral. Where we know that the opportunity to move that candidate forward and close them may require a level of complexity that isn't required in other areas of our business. So that's definitely a role, even though we call it a traditional role. It's still of high value to us because it drives towards the outcome in a relatively uncomplicated way, but highly effective way. We then have 2 other areas. So we have the agile recruiter that really works around backlog. Often they work in teams for us. So oftentimes they'll be working on with some level of collective responsibility, which if you think about recruitment, a recruitment consultant as a dynamic, it's very easy to list towards the idea that they would be purely assessed on an individual contribution. This is your requisitions, this is your conversion rate, this is your time to fill, and all those traditional ways that people are viewed. But actually moving towards more team goals and knowing that people are stronger in different parts of the process. And the idea that actually at certain parts of a process, you're no longer doing the intensive sourcing and the candidate management, but actually you've got a candidate going through the workflow. So actually, can those people be redeployed so you've got overlapping work happening, playing to people's strengths? And so the agile recruiters are a really important role for us. And then the final part is the cognitive recruiter, which is really where we have surrounding them by a lot of the technology that we use and also the technology we're developing and piloting, where they'll be using much more augmented views around the value that they're adding, the insights they're able to give, automating large parts of the process, being able to leverage much more insights and inference and abilities to guide our hiring managers and guide the leaders within IBM to be able to make more effective decisions, and more informed decisions. And then not only that, when they make those decisions, is creating that feedback loop so that we learn even more for next time, and we become even more refined in our processes. So no longer thinking about recruitment as a very linear thing, but actually thinking about it as almost like an infinite loop. That just because just closing out a requisition is just one part on that loop, and then it's actually yes, there's the, as they say, the bum on seat, but actually then there's a whole set of insights that then goes back to a requisition opening that drives it back forward. So
and you're mentioning augmented and agile and technology, and those familiar with IBM and Watson, I might cynically say it's easy for Kevin. He's huge budget, loads of tech. You can solve any problems. I don't have that. I'm in a world where I have tight budget, everything else. Can you share a little insight on what that budget versus demand of the team environment looks like in IBM, the reality of it, and maybe walk us through a couple of examples? Because you shared some with us earlier on around specific examples of where you really got to cut deep in cost and how technology is actually delivered on a cost-cutting exercise, a better candidate experience all around, and while still delivering on that cost pressure. Maybe we share that insight into what IBM's TA is really like for those who might be cynically going, it's easy for you guys.
Yeah, it's easy because I have Watson, right? It doesn't quite work like
Watson
that.
and money.
No, it's not really not like that. I mean, I think from my perspective, listen, IBM is an organization that is driving innovation and combining that with creating organizational health through efficiencies, right? And so I think from our perspective, it's about, how do we create more value? So it's not necessarily about trying to achieve in a cost window. It's all about that value creation. It's all about how can we create a faster point from A to B and make it in a way that is effective around what everybody has, which is we're an organization that has a business model that's based around a P&L. So it's what we want to do is we want to do great things, and we also want to be fiscally responsible in doing them. So I would say that when I look at other organizations, it's not there's no competitive advantage necessarily in terms of huge budgets. Obviously we have Watson, but that's not the only product out there. I think what it is, it's about how we apply our thinking to the idea of creating that value in a slightly differentiated way. So, the advantage we have is we have other organizations within IBM that really step in and help us. So that's probably where I do benefit, is the fact that we have a global business services organization that works with companies on solving business problems as well as talent problems, but specifically business problems. And if you think about recruitment, is from a HR perspective, it's a services organization. You're solving a lot of the time a mathematics problem as much as anything. Is that you have to achieve X, and you start with X. And it's the algorithm in the middle that dictates how successful you are, which is things like capacity plan and utilization, all these different things, which is like a consulting organization. So leveraging things the way they think about their resources, the way they do the kind of stuff, and then obviously the idea that we can co-create product with the fact that Watson is an IBM product, but we just don't get people knocking on our door hand delivering these amazing talent acquisition solutions. We co-create, we sit down and say because IBM is solving the problem that our customers are solving, then it's okay, well, we can do it in a real environment with over 40,000 hires a year, with operating in 170 countries. Arguably, there's no better environment to road test any of this stuff, right? So when we go to pilot, it probably goes under the most extreme pressures, and I think the way we look at this is around failing fast. So we talk about I know we talked earlier on about some of the stuff we're doing around thinking about our agile platform, where taking traditional recruiting and trying to apply an agile way of thinking by going to backlogs. So basically starting, instead of ramping up to a time to fill, is actually counting down to it, so we can actually test our velocity. But there's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, right? Because we want to try, we want to push ourselves, and we want to make it uncomfortable for ourselves. And sometimes we make it too uncomfortable for ourselves, and we say, well, it's not going to make the grade because we're not ready to consume it. The technology isn't there. But actually, by virtue of the fact that we have an organization that we can partner with, it works really well for us.
But tell me about metrics. We started with that and saying, I know you've 18 months in, solving problem by problem, moving people through roles, bringing in agile. But fundamentally, all this stuff has to get funded, has to get sold to the business. And oftentimes you see that there's a disconnect between TA language and business language, and our metrics and their metrics. And most conferences and conversations you'll have with TA leaders will go, oh, I don't like time to hire, I like cost to hire, I like this other thing, and I have a version of it. You've very recently started sharing with people your vision of a completely new approach, because I think it is a completely new approach to TA metrics, business metrics delivered through TA or through talent. Can you share a little bit more about what today looks like for most companies and what your vision is, your reality is today in IBM, and what your vision is, I think, for the community?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it is about the idea that we would maybe get a bit closer, but it's not just about the stuff that TA own. It's about the stuff that TA influence or that we're a stakeholder in. And so why shouldn't we report about how we're doing as an organization? Because if I'm the head of talent acquisition, which I am, I'm basically on the hook, for want of a better phrase, for our organizational health around talent acquisition. Now, I'm not in every interview. I'm not in every requisition creation. I'm not in every offer. But I am responsible for the idea of that, through my organization, we should be influencing that. And you're right. I mean, I've talked to you about talent acquisition metrics before, and mostly they largely orientate around productivity, which is important because, we're an organization that is funded as a cost to the company. And so therefore we want to make sure that the company extracts the greatest possible value from us, and that organizational and operational efficiency is important to us. So, it's critical. But I think I see too many times where organizations only use that as the measurement of success. And they talk about, it's cost per hire, or it's cost per fill, or it's time to hire and it's time to fill. Not always having a direct correlation to quality. Most have a quality metric now, but how deep does it go in terms of, is it actually talking to real value in the business, or is it arbitrarily just saying, was that good? Was that a good hire? And so I think from my perspective, we're going to continue to push on with the productivity metrics because it's important, and we want to continue to demonstrate value. But what I also want to do is, I want to answer the questions of like, what's the real value that talent acquisition is adding to my organization? How are you impacting my ability to be competitive or win? How are you impacting my ability to achieve my objectives? Because that's really what they're asking. Even if they're asking the questions in the terminology that talent acquisition has just traditionally forced upon them, we're just taking that and we're turning that into productivity outcomes for them. And when I sometimes sit in front of productivity metrics, and we've increased the NPS 2 points, and we've shaved off another 5 days off the time to fill, and we've increased this and we've increased that. And I sit there and say, wow, what a great job we're doing. Aren't we fantastic? It's a little bit self-congratulatory, It's a little bit like, okay, well, I define these metrics to tell you what good recruiting looks like, and I probably set the targets, and I'm going to feel good that I'm green across the board, right? And that's great because, but productivity is important. But actually understanding going much deeper on the business challenge that they're trying to solve. And what's our propensity to be successful with them? So thinking about things like, okay, there's a value to a business of a requisition. It provides a specific value back. It could be linked to product build out, it could be linked to sales targets, it could be linked to recovery of revenue. It could be anything across our spectrum. So it's starting to focus on what's the business value? How do we work towards prioritization? How do we start to think about these things as, okay, what's important? How does our service reflect that? And also, what's the level of scarcity in the market? So how do we think about, okay, well, there's multiple axes. So even if you just go with those two, market scarcity being high, business value being high, well, you probably want your best resources pointed at that, and you probably want to talk about the value. Now, that value is created through the work that you do in delivering, but also the value is created by removing the things that sit around it that may be a barrier to success. So slow-moving processes, too many interviews, hiring managers not being held accountable for handoffs and feedback. And then you've got things like, like everything, business requirements shift. So everybody that does my job, I know for a fact, has to deal with wastage. We think we're going to need to do this, but actually when it becomes a reality, we probably need to do this. completely acceptable.
Are you talking about like
position.
sourcing for roles that don't get filled, candidates that get brought to interview that we change the spec on or move the timelines on, stuff that should turn into good stuff that is just kind of thrown away
all of
for
that,
whatever reasons?
and with good intent. Like nobody ever opens a requisition from my team thinking, this isn't real. But the business moves on and the requirements change, and as our customers' requirements change. And so for me, it's like, okay, how do we help report and control some of that wastage and really not hold a business accountable per se, because it is truly a partnership. It's getting them to acknowledge that they can actually increase their own recruitment velocity and increase their own experience of how they consume my services. Because I have a finite level of service. So if they want the most of that, they have to maximize my opportunity to be successful. And that's what they do. If we start talking about wastage, how do we reduce wastage? How do we cut out? How do we speed up the handoffs? How do we hold up people accountable? So that instead of me just saying when I sit down with my bosses and say, oh, this is the KPI chart for recruitment, and this is our time to fill, this is our candidate NPS, this is our hiring manager NPS, which are important. But like, this is where we've added to like the skills that we wanted to hire. This is where we've driven growth. This is where we've contributed revenue. A large part of our business is based around services and consulting, which is, it's billable assets. So the faster we go, it creates revenue opportunity for the company. So how do we tie that back? How do we demonstrate that we're creating that revenue opportunity for the company? And then also focusing around, like how we creating new experiences that drive the future growth. So how do we lock into the skills that the company needs to move forward? And again, I don't just mean a list of coding languages, but like the skills around how much are we assessing and delivering on our idea that we want people with a high degree of learning agility, that we want people that are able to think to a high degree of cognitive ability, and so how do we actually tying it into the things that actually really matter, that really matter at a P&L level, that really matter at a growth level, as opposed to just saying, oh, the business should be better because I do this faster, quicker, cheaper, smarter. Like it's all good, but actually let's start to turn it into a business conversation. Let's start to turn it into, how do we actually measure our services in a way that's meaningful to the organization?
Tell me in closing, Kevin, if you're, a talent acquisition leader tempted to make a change in how you talk about metrics to non-TA professionals, even beyond the HR office, if that's where you sit. What are kind of your top 2 or 3 business metrics that you've seen the rest of the business, come to life about when you talk? Like if you're going to translate what we do in TA to the rest of the business, and you're not doing that as a talent leader today, you're still talking about time to hire, fill rates, etc. What do you think are the most valuable metrics that people need to be talking about to move to this new model of thinking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But first of all, I think one of the things that actually is probably worth highlighting, as you were mentioning, the P1, P2, P3. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a negative impact on the service. No. So you think about a recruiter right now, a recruiter that has P1, P2, P3 requisitions, they have to service the P3 to a certain level, which may detract from their ability to service the P1 and the P2. Now, if you've got an organization where you say, no, we're going to segment and P3s are going to be delivered in a certain way, they become really good at servicing P3s. So actually, we expect the velocity to increase around that delivery because they're really good at doing P3 requisitions and really focused, and they're not distracted by the P1s, which take a deep search methodology that takes a lot of source and a lot of candidate cultivation, a lot of candidate relationship management, that kind of stuff. And so what you may find is that you then move to this idea that you decouple the whole idea of capacity plan, and you reinvent the idea of capacity plan and utilization, and you think about it differently. So I think that's important. But as I think to the top 1, 2, 3 things, certainly looking at tying yourself to the strategic imperative of the business is critical, because their strategic imperative is not time to fill, candidate NPS, hiring manager NPS. It's important. We know it's important, but actually tying yourself to the strategic imperative and what does that look like. So I think, first of all, that's a critical thing. I think the constant retrospective and the reviewing, not thinking about these are my KPIs and these are my KPIs for the next 10 years. The KPIs that I see in a lot of organizations, I have friends that do my job, they're still trying to improve and enhance on the very binary and narrow set of KPIs that they have. So the idea that, you know, you think as agile as the business thinks, as they start to think about how they shift against products, as they shift against skills, as they start to differentiate their talent strategy, shouldn't your KPIs and your performance indicators kind of move with them? So the idea that it's like a static thing is like, oh, these are our KPIs and these are for the next 5 years and this is how we're going to measure ourselves, and that's critically important. You know, I think that you need to get away from that. And then I think, you know, getting really close to the demand and really drilling down on the wastage and making sure that, you know, because what you have is you have, as any leader, even if you have an unlimited budget, which, you know, which nobody has, but even if you had an unlimited budget, you're constrained by your ability to hire people, right? So it's never going to be ending. Even if you could hire people infinitely, you're always going to be constrained about the fact you haven't got those people yet. So the idea that you can actually start to, you know, get things into prioritization, control the wastage, really challenge stuff, constant retrospectives, you know, don't leave, you know, if things are open for a long period of time, is it because we're not doing a good job, or is it because actually it's less critical to the business, and not allowing these things to drift? So constantly being in a state of retrospective and reviewing that the work you're doing is really important.
Kevin, we're in the hills of Barcelona. It's getting late.
We are, yeah.
And really appreciate your insights. We could talk for several more hours. And maybe we'll do as a second follow-up talk. Really appreciate the insights. I think there's a lot to learn. And I know you're a very open guy, so any leaders who want to reach out to you, I know you give your time to try and share the cause of what your belief is of where TA needs to go and the metrics we have as well. So please reach out to Kevin. He won't ignore you. This man works 24 hours a day and thinks about TA and doing things better non-stop. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this TA Talk. Please subscribe for further TA Talks, and don't forget, we'll be back again next month.